All right, greetings. So today I wanted to talk about Gary Gordon and Randy Shughart, two gentlemen who were awarded the Medal of Honor for their actions in the Battle of Mogadishu, Somalia in 1993. Gary Gordon and Randy Shughart were two gentlemen who were brought to my attention in 2006. When I was in basic training, I had a drill sergeant named Drill Sergeant Angel, tiny man, fierce man, tiny man. And he thought that it was imperative that we all know the names of two gentlemen out of our smart books. Gary Gordon, Randy Shughart. Smart books is a ironic term the military gives to a book that's supposed to educate new entries into basic training. And after many years, they finally pop back up onto my radar when I'm thinking of topics for this. And I was going to do Jerry Mad Dog Shriver from SOG, but here we are. And as I digging for information for Gary and Randy, I end up asking more and more questions along the way that lead me to doing more and more in-depth research on just what happened in Somalia and what happened in Mogadishu in particular to make the events necessitate the bringing in of two operators, Delta Force guys, Rangers, Special Forces, snipers, that necessitated them being on the ground from a helicopter, securing a crash site, and dying in an effort to save their fallen comrades. And during this endeavor, I started to learn more and more about Somalia. And before I know it, I'm doing a whole history of Somalia just to get a better understanding of why they were there and what exactly led to their deaths. So, before I get into anything about these two gentlemen, I really just want to give you a brief overlay of Somalia in particular and how it got to the state it was in when these gentlemen arrived. So without any further ado, Somalia. Somalia is a coastal country located along the Horn of Africa, south end of the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden area. It's an ancient place that's had humans in it it's cradle of civilization. That's Africa. So as long as there have been humans in that area, they've been, inhabiting that coastline. And it's a very important coastline for obvious reasons. It's the south of the Red Sea. You got traders coming in from Greece and later Rome, and then you have other traders coming in from Southeast Asia. There's stories of animals making their way from the coast of Africa, Somalia, to China, for the emperor to be like, wow, that's a giraffe, cool. And that makes it pretty important. And so it was several city-states that joined together, did trade, and then eventually Islam arrives around 600 CE, about the point of the Hijra. Not very great with Arab. But that is the journey of the Prophet Muhammad and his followers from Mecca to Medina, and that's 622 CE. So for a very long time, this place has been around, and then Islam's introduced briefly, shortly after its founding. Its leader makes his way around the Middle East and spreads all that fun. And during that same time, or shortly after that, other tribes and other clans from different parts of the Middle East start coming in and marrying into the clans that are already in Somaliland, that area. And these clans eventually will band together and form a sultanate of Mogadishu. And that's the first running dynasty in the area that we know about. And it would go on like that for several hundred years with sultanates in charge and different factions warring for power. But ultimately, you have Christians and Muslims fighting it out. But in the end, the predominant religion, even to this day, is Islam. So that goes on for quite a while. Very important for trade. Very important stop if you're coming in from anywhere in that region, coming out of the Red Sea. So I don't know how much of this is worth backtracking over, but sailing today is vastly different than it has been for the predominant amount of time we've sailed for any reason. Generally, you sail within the side of the coast. So, you keep the coast on a side of you can see. So if something happens to your ship, you can have this illusion that you're going to swim to safety and you're not going to be totally screwed. Also, it's just easier to navigate when you follow, knowing, okay, land's there. It's like a worry stone or comfort blanket. So fast forward a bit. Well, rewind. That's why it's so important for such a long time, because it's a coastal region. Coastal country, region, land, sultanate, city state. It's, the Horn of Africa. So if you're traveling around later, if you're coming in from Southeast Asia, if you're going down from the Red Sea, you're probably going to stop here at a convenience for trade. It went to old saying, any port in a storm, if you will. So now we can fast forward, 19th century, Berlin Conference. This is all going to be painted with broad strokes, so please don't get upset. Roughly, it's an attempt to regulate the trade and colonization of Africa. So European powers get together because we love to make it legal when we do something atrocious, people in general. And so they legalize this, they regulate it, and this begins a scramble of European powers to get, while the getting's good in Africa, and this creates the necessity for the longest resistance movement to colonialism on the African continent. The longest and bloodiest. You always got to throw that in there. Bloodiest too. Movement that we're going to be focusing on mainly dealt with the British and the Italians. So the Horn going up to the Gulf of Aden, that is the Italian sphere of influence, and then south of Djibouti, yeah, that's it. And then right on the Gulf in the mouth of the Red Sea, that area, that's the British Somaliland, and that's where these resistance movements were taking place. Essentially, there was resistance movements in them to get things back the way they were, or at least push out the invader. And these resistance movements were often battered back into the hinterlands or into Ethiopia or whatever have you. And for the British side, there's 4 attempts to invade the coastal region, but each one's defeated or pushed back. But eventually, British air power in the 1920s puts a stop to that. What are you going to do? Planes. This collapsed the resistance movement in that portion, the northeasternmost portion, and that became a British protectorate. And then in that same period in Somaliland, 1920s, there's a dervish movement whose leader, I'm not going to butcher his name, but essentially he is killed, and that puts an end to this resistance movement. Well, more or less puts an end of the resistance movement in this area. And that's, the longest and bloodiest one on the African continent that I'm aware of, at the very least. And so shortly after this, fun with fascism, Mussolini, Italy, that all shoots off. So after the governor in this region has a wrestling of control with the people in that region who are influential, and eventually he calls on help from Eritrea and some of their other, Italian colony type things up in that region, calls in for more troops, looks pretty incompetent doing it. home base isn't happy. Italy's not happy. It's not happy. So they end up sending down some more bigger badass guys to come in and start making things happen. But eventually, they just, devolve to the old tried and true, bombarding it with the naval vessels of the coastline. And then coming in and taking livestock or slaughtering livestock that refuses to come with you, I guess. And force these resistance fighters to Ethiopia, which will come into play here in just a minute, but essentially west of Mogadishu is where these guys get pushed into. 1936, Somaliland is formed with parts of East Africa and Eritrea and Ethiopia. So that's, that short little period. Then 1940, the Italian troops invade British Somaliland. And that, it was successful for a while, but then World War II happens. And then 1941, the British become battle. The British do what they do in Africa, and the British began administrative duties in Italian Somaliland after that invasion and the good times that follow an invasion. 1950, the UN decides to be formed shortly after that, and they consider Somaliland to be trust territory under British influence and administrative duties. Then 1960, the British Somaliland is granted independence as a state of Somaliland, and then the reunification of British and Italian Somaliland form the Somali Republic. So you got the Horn of Africa, and then the downside of the Horn of Africa, modern day Somalia. That's what we're calling it, Somali Republic. Somali Republic was a civilian government headed by a gent we'll call Yusuf, and this lasted until 1969. So 1969 has the Supreme Revolutionary Council, SRC, headed by Mohammed Siadid Barre. Mohammed Siadid Barre. Good luck. We'll go with Barre. He seizes power after an assassination of the then president, and we're going to go with Shughart. Sharmak. Not great with names, but if you look it up, you'll see what I'm mispronouncing. And this guy was conveniently enough shot dead by a policeman, and wouldn't you know it, the head of the chief of police and lieutenant colonel of the army were the ones involved in the coup. Huh. Pretty sure there's nothing wrong going on there, but nothing too terrible happens here. President gets killed, some other people get killed, things happen. But it's not all that bad. You got these revolutionary guys come in, they establish large-scale public works, they start introducing more literacy programs, and when you have, a record amount of literate people at this point, because I'm assuming, I didn't read this anywhere, but I'm just assuming not everybody was literate beforehand, and then they bring in literacy teachings, then all of a sudden you're like, look at these numbers, there's way more people literate when you're focusing on teaching them now. Yeah, that's going to increase those numbers, but I could be wrong. It's happened before. So public work program, tradition is focused on heavily, religion is focused on heavily. They want to link with the Arab world because they're Muslims, Arabs are Muslims, hey, why not? So stability is the picture I'm painting right now. You have all this time, it's a fairly stable place, as stable as a place is going to be. It can be expected when it's ruled by a sultanate, and, crops are there, crops are harvested, mercantilism's there, goods are exchanged, services are provided. You can go out, get something to drink, you can go get something to eat, you can go to a mosque, on whenever they go to the mosque, every day of the week, I don't know, every morning. And it's nothing like, the point of that painting is, it's nothing like the war-torn hellhole we see in that movie Black Hawk Down with that weird-looking guy, Josh, whatever his name is. It's got a bunch of British people playing Americans. That's one of the funny things about that movie. But, it's not anything like that. It's, it's not like a 5-star Michelin restaurant type deal everywhere you go, but it's a stable place where people get fed. They have traditions, they have religion, they have things that they get along with. And then shortly after this, Bahrain's still in power. Get used to that. And then the Ogden War broke out. So Ogaden War broke out in 1977. And Ogaden area is essentially that area where all those people were pushed out into Ethiopia or just went there on their own. And the Somali government, let's be correct, the Somali government wanted to reunify that. They wanted to bring that into their sole sphere of influence, and that involved military might. And so Ethiopia is invaded, Somali troops pushed out of the Ogden land, and then suddenly, then 20,000 Cuban troops, aided by Soviet experts, come in to help the Ethiopian Communist Party. And with that help, these Soviet interventions put Bahrain, pushes him back into Somalia, and so that prompts Somalia to seek the aid or come to the attention of the United States. Why? Because if you have the Soviets coming into your territory and you know somebody who hates the Soviets, who's, bigger and badder than they are, why not seek their help? So 1979, the Somali Revolutionary Socialist Party was disbanded, and the Somali Revolutionary Council became a thing. Bahrain again, in power. Like I said, get used to it. Oh, I skipped over that. So before that, we have the SRC, Somali Revolutionary Council. So that was disbanded by itself in 1976, and then the Somali Revolutionary Socialist Party became the one government party based on scientific socialism and Islamic tenets. That's what took its place. So that happens. Then, like we said, the Ogaden War. Then wrapping it back up to Somaliland is the Somali Revolutionary Socialist Party no longer. And then the Somali Revolutionary Council is once again a thing. And then Bahrain is still in power. Great, we're caught back up. Then, what good place isn't complete without a genocide? So we see the Isak genocide. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I got Bahrain's name right. Congratulations, me. So it's called by some, and well, I never knew about it, so I could not have forgotten it, but I'm calling it now the Forgotten Genocide. And this is a state-sponsored, always the best, massacre of Isak civilians between 1987 and 1989. Yay, me, my birthday, 87. Leading to the deaths of roughly over 100,000 people. State-sponsored massacre of over 100,000 people. I've seen more, I've seen less. I split the diff at 100,000. This also included the destruction of one of their second largest cities, because why not cut off your nose to spite your face? So you just leveled this city, killing and displacing thousands of people, and it is one of the largest displacements of people in recorded African history, which lead me to believe, unless there was way more people before they kept records that were displaced, it's the biggest one ever. So far. Give us time. We're humans. As the Cold War draws to a close, strategic importance of Somaliland starts to diminish, the government becomes increasingly totalitarian, resistance movements encouraged by Ethiopia were becoming a thing, and they sprout up like weeds, and so eventually we see, with the sowing of dissidence and the totalitarian overreach of government, we see a civil war bloom. So think less stability at this point. Now, Bahrain, who I think it bears mentioning, he had a Hitler mustache in the 60s, which is either ironic, or he's a Charlie Chaplin fan, or he just really liked the mustache look. But Bahrain, with the Hitler mustache, his health begins to deteriorate. And then in 1986, he's involved in a car crash when they hit a bus, and he never truly recovered from this. He ends up being sent to, I believe, Saudi Arabia to spend some time in a hospital. And he does recover and come back. He recovers enough to win elections, kind of like, we used to say FDR. I guess we could use Fetterman now as a better example. It's kind of like that in that, you remember what they did with Joe Biden during the election, where they just kind of hit him in the basement and let him come out every once in a while when they jacked him up on speed or whatever it was. It's kind of the same thing. They bring him out for elections and then they rush him away, and then he wins his totalitarian election and he stays in power. Who would have seen this coming? But this, it's an overreach. It's constant totalitarianism, and people can only put up with that for so long. And then when you have Ethiopia being like, look, just rebel and do something about it, then you start getting coup attempts. And so there are how many is it? It's several coup attempts. It's enough for him to be like, this is beyond a coincidence. So he's just like, what are the chances? The guns just keep going off near me. So eventually, the coup is enough to prompt the civil war. He loses the support of the people. The regime is toppled, and the disbanding of the Somali National Army occurs. For now. Okay, shortly thereafter, Barre flees in a tank with $27 million worth of gold in various currencies. Now, wouldn't that be a sight to see? If they ever do a movie about this guy, you gotta do the scene of him fleeing in a tank with gold bars rattling around in the back and a bunch of coins from foreign countries. So, he attempted 2 more times to retake the capital, but obviously they don't go as planned. They all fail. Finally, he's forced into exile. I heard that he got shot and died of complications from the wound, but when you look up how his death is, I see heart attack. Split the diff. He was going to die anyways. 1996, August 1st, his death day. So Hitler mustache guy, out of the picture, 1996. But our story takes place in 1993, so he's still he's still hanging around at that time. So all of this creates a power vacuum, as great civil wars do. And this power vacuum puts an end to customary law. There's a collapse of goods and services being exchanged legally. All the hallmarks of a good economic collapse are there. And then, because that's not enough, they have a drought, a terrible drought. And so what crops are still being planted, what people are still hanging in there, they don't have enough water to get them to the crops. Crops ended up going kaput. And so then you see yourself with large-scale death from starvation and malnutrition and all the other fun that comes along with famine. But before that is actually, before all of that settles, the sediment on that settles, if you will, the UNISOM is created and arrives in 1992. And UNISOM is United Nations Operation of Somalia. They're essentially peacekeepers. And so Somalia at this time has 2 main factions. United Somali Congress, led by Ali Mahdi Muhammad, and then the Somali National Alliance, led by Mohammed Farah Aidid. Now, Aidid is the guy that you're going to want to keep his name in mind. Aidid is the gentleman who everybody wants. He's the Where's Waldo of Somalia. Every time somebody's opening a book, they're looking for Aidid. And eventually, Aidid becomes general of the Somali National Alliance, but his power is limited in a sense because there is a council of elders that kind of can convene and be like, look, Aidid, you're doing this wrong. We think you're doing this wrong. But essentially, power is vested in Aidid. The fighting between these 2 factions continues for months, spreads throughout the country, mass casualties, estimates put them over 20,000, splitting the diff here. And the destruction of the country's agriculture, of course, leads to mass starvation. Drought occurs, mass starvation, civil war, civil unrest, collapse of customary law. This all happens very rapidly, as it tends to do. And so this prompted action from the international community. International community sends in food, they send in aid, they send in supplies, but much more of it is hijacked. They say about 80% is the number I saw that was sent in was hijacked. You know, they call, you know, what is Somalia? When you think of Somalia, what do you think? You think of Captain Phillips, I am the captain, you think pirates. You know, so why not do what you're best known for and steal supplies from people? That's what they do. They end up stealing supplies, exchanging it for weapons and whatever you can get for aid that comes in from the international community. Starvation, 1.5 million suffer from at least malnutrition, over 200,000 people die. These numbers are exacerbated by the drought. Hijackings lead to Operation Provide Relief. That's prompted by George H.W. Bush, and it consisted of 10 C-130s, the big ones, and 400 personnel sent into Kenya to airlift aid in to parts of Somalia to go bypass the warlords, right? Or bypass whoever's hijacking this aid. Truck convoys, of course, are getting hijacked. These planes end up doing a little bit of a better job, but it's still nowhere near what it needs to be. The effects falls far from the mark. And this leads to Operation Restore Hope. For when the first operation doesn't succeed, do another one, name it something better. Operation Restore Hope. Who doesn't like that? And a U.S.-led, UN-sanctioned, because what are they good for? Multinational force operating in Somalia. A UN resolution is adopted, which 794 is what it called. If you want to look it up and then try and summarize it for me, if you will. I didn't really feel like doing it. It was boring. It reaffirms resolutions recognizing the grave situation on the grounds in Somalia. You could have just said that. This is a resolution to recognize the grave situation on the ground in Somalia. But instead we went with 794. This prompted United Nations Task Force, UNITAF, in Mogadishu. So, UNITAF arrives, United States Marine Corps sends in troops, Army sends in troops, all to intervene on the international community's behalf. Famine situation begins to improve with all these combined efforts, but it's still not enough. Not enough. Far from it. So, Unit 794, the good fun one that addresses dire situation on the ground, paves a way for troops being deployed into Somalia. These troops are going in there as peacekeeping because there's no police. The army, if there is one, isn't really doing anything good. And so you see on March 3rd, 1993, the UN Secretary General Boutros, a man so nice they named him twice, submitting recommendations that UNITAF be transitioned to UNISOM, United Nations Operations of Somalia. Citing the effectiveness of Resolution 794, the good one, this presence of troops on the ground created a more secure environment for aid and resources to be distributed. And all is, oh wait, no, it's not well. There's still no government. There's no government in effect, nor police or a national army. There's no security provided by the UN to the UN personnel. And so to attempt to solve this problem, they come out with UNISOM 2, the sequel. Shortly thereafter, there's a conference of national reconciliation in Somalia. It's held in the capital of Ethiopia, Addis, I will look it up, capital of Ethiopia. This involved 15 parties agreeing to the terms set out to restore peace and democracy. Wouldn't you know it, it doesn't work. A month or so later, it became clear that it didn't work because one of the signers of the agreement, Farah Aidid, that gentleman, his faction wasn't cooperating with the agreement, and he was kind of off doing his own thing, living life on the road. All right, well, I think I'm going to call it on this for now. Next time, we'll start with the attack and the hunt for a deed, Bloody Monday, house raid, all kinds of good times. So, the takeaway here, Somalia, once a place that was fairly stable, has deteriorated from civil war, famine, and drought into a very